The first scene starts with a beautiful-looking nerd named Haruka fighting a huge masked man in an arena. We later find out that Haruka is our main protagonist's older sister. Haruka fights valiantly until the end when she is struck down unconscious in a pool of her own blood. Our setting is now set in Seidokan Academy. We meet our male protagonist, Ayato. A handkerchief falls from the window, so Ayato decides to jump up there to return it like any normal person would. Not surprisingly, he caught the occupant, Julius, our female protagonist, in the middle of putting on her clothes. To her credit, she doesn't freak out. She calmly tells him to turn around, finishes dressing, and asks him about the handkerchief. He tells her he found it, and she's so overcome with relief that she tears up. Ayato probably thought he was safe. But little does he know that Julius is bipolar. Although she was grateful for the handkerchief, Julius announces that she will kill him since he saw her naked and unleashes a fireball. Being the main character, he survives, so Julius challenges him to a duel. As you might expect, Ayato is much better than she expected. She can't take him out even when she unleashes her most powerful attacks. He counters, but instead of winning the match, Ayato knocks her down to save her from an arrow. He unintentionally grabs a watermelon on the way down. Fortunately for him, the chief representative of Seidokan Academy and student council president, Claudia Enfield, intervened. She declared the duel null and void because some paperwork held up Ayato officially being a student. Claudia pulls him away to finish his admittance. Claudia takes him to her office, where she explains how she expects him and all of the students to win in the yearly battles against the other 5 Genestella schools. This is apparently a problem for Seidokan, since the school's recent record is dismal. If he triumphs, Claudia tells him that he can have anything his heart desires. To which he replied that he's not really interested in that sort of thing. She reasonably asks him why he came to Asterisk, when we see a flashback of Ayato's sister and glowing chains. The memory prompted him to ask Claudia what she knew about his sister, which turned out to be not much. Ayato then asks about what paperwork he needs to get done for his admittance. But Claudia says she completely made that up. She just wanted to get Ayato alone. Since he has had a taste of Julius watermelons, Claudia wanted to show him that her watermelons are better. No surprise when Ayato joins his class and finds his seats next to Julius. He tries to make up with her after class, but she shuts him down. Yubuki Aishiru, who is sitting behind Ayato and turns out to be his roommate, comforts him by saying that Julius keeps everyone at arm's length. He also tells Ayato that Julius is a real princess of Sultania, a monarchy that's rising in power in Europe. As they're heading for the dorms, they come across Lester McPhail, a very large and angry man, confronting Julius. Lester didn't take kindly to her dueling Ayato when she repeatedly turned Lester down. Julius responds that she has no interest in dueling Lester as she has already beaten him 3 times. While in class, Ayato discovers that an old friend of his, Sasami Asaya, is a classmate, and she's attending school to help promote her father's weapons business. Ayato realizes he doesn't know his way around and asks Julius to show him around the campus. Julius blushes a little and clears her throat. She says that she'll help him out since she is a nice person. Claudia stops by to make sure Ayato doesn't forget about her. Later, Ayato and Claudia go to claim Haruka's sword called Servaresta. It has been kept at the school since her disappearance. After Ayato is attacked by the sword, he convinces it to acknowledge him as its master. Ayato now has one of the most powerful swords in Asterisk. Claudia is turned on. Claudia then asks Ayato if he would mind coming to her dorm after. She says she only wants to talk about something very important.
Are you sure about that?
Ayato learns that top students have been dropping out of the Phoenix Festa, a major ranking competition, because they've been attacked and severely injured. Claudia wants him to stay by Julius's side to protect her from the same fate. Before he leaves, Claudia asks if he wants to sleep over. It's getting pretty dark outside, so she's afraid he might get robbed. But being the anime protagonist that he is, Ayato leaves. The next day, Julius shows Ayato around the city. On their way home, they run into students from the Lu Wolf Academy dueling on an isolated street. Immediately, Julius realizes it's a trap. Without breaking a sweat, she flames the hoodlums into unconsciousness except for the leader, who explains they'd been hired by the man who he sees standing behind the tree line. Julius sprints after the man in the trees despite Ayato's warning, and she was barely able to avoid the ambush. Ayato reaches her in time to disrupt an attack from what turned out to be 3 assailants. Julius invites him back to her place. She innocently asks Ayato to take off his clothes. Ayato misunderstands her intent. She only wanted to repay him by repairing his clothes. Julius tells Ayato about her connection to an orphanage, and how she's fighting now to funnel her winnings to them so they can keep the orphanage going. The next day, Julius receives a letter and leaves immediately after class. Ayato thinks she's trying to keep her distance again, but Claudia, after hearing about the letter, says Julius is likely trying to keep him safe and uninvolved. After some thought, Ayato comes to an epiphany and states that he has finally found meaning in his life: to protect Julius from the horrors of this world. Julius arrives at the place designated in the letter. There, she discovers Silas Norman, one of the students at the school that we barely get introduced to before this encounter, who discloses that he was behind the attacks. Lester arrives, having been tricked into thinking Julius accepted his challenge, and discovers that Silas intends to kill both of them and make it look like it was Lester was behind the assaults. Silas unleashes dozens and dozens of his combat dolls against them. Lester falls quickly. The more powerful Julius fares better, but sheer numbers begin to wear her down. Just as Silas and his puppets were about to kill her, our hero arrives just on time. He confesses to her that he knows his purpose in life is to protect her. Silas rudely interrupts the awkward moment. Carrying Julius all the while, Ayato defends until he figures out Silas' patterns. Moments later, he demolishes the puppet army.
Second sword! 9 fangs!
When Silas tries to escape using a flying puppet, Julius lifts the two of them after Silas, since she can fly and Ayato can't. They knock Silas out of the sky, and he falls where Claudia shows up out of nowhere. The chains that bind Ayato strike again before the two of them can land. After he passes out, we learn that his sister had placed a restriction on his user of power just before she left. He is only able to use his power for 5 minutes. He awakens to find his head pillowed on Julius' lap, and they share a touching conversation. After some flirting, they decide to team up for the Phoenix Festa. The scene switches to Claudia as she catches up with Silas and nearly kills him. The scene shifts to Ayato, who's rushing because he's late for a meeting with Julius, his partner for the upcoming festa. In his rush, he runs into Kirin. A mean man interrupts and she immediately apologizes to the mean one and runs off with him. Julius was angry that Ayato was a little late and decided to channel that anger into their practice. She almost beat him, but he withstood a withering attack in the last second of the fight. After they discuss their strategy for the festa, she warns him not to get involved in any unnecessary duels. She doesn't want anyone to see what kind of moves he has. Claudia arrives with Ernesta Kuhn and Camilla Pareto from Alicante. Ernesta lets slip that the puppets Ayato destroyed were her creation. She whispers to him that he won't be so lucky next time, then flirtatiously kisses him on the cheek. Julius is not amused. Later, Ayato is discussing Alicante's research teams with his friend Aishiru when he hears a slap. Koichiro, Kirin's uncle, slapped her for disagreeing with him. When she tried to protest, Ayato intervened. The uncle promised never to get violent with Kirin again if Ayato beat her in a duel. She tells him to decline the duel and walk away. But our main protagonist says he can't leave a girl hanging like that after seeing what her uncle did. She thanks him, but still says she can't afford to lose. They begin the duel. Julius shows up and Aishiru tells her that Ayato is fighting the nicknamed Lightning Speedblade. We subsequently find out that Kirin is actually the #1 rank in their school. Throughout the duel, Ayato seemed to constantly be on the defensive and eventually loses from time expiration. Next we see Julius fling a washcloth onto Ayato's head. Julius mentions that since Kirin destroyed his student badge, Ayato needs to meet with Claudia to get a replacement. Claudia tells Ayato that Kirin's uncle, also known as the Woman Beater, is a big shot recruiter for Seidukan Academy. He's not an executive yet, but he's using Kirin to propel himself onto the board. Claudia then reveals that having a highly energetic sense of self-interest is self-defeating at Integrated Enterprise Foundation, and that it is very unlikely for the Woman Beater to ever achieve his ambitions. She knows so much about it because her mom is one of the executives. As he's returning to his dorm, Ayato is surprised to see Kirin. She wants to thank him for trying to help her. As he walks her back to her dorm, they begin talking about different sword techniques and, unsurprising, find they share a common interest. Speaking of Julius, she confronts him at lunch to find out why he's been training with Kirin. She's relieved that he seems to view it as no more than basic practice and nothing more. As they're on their morning run, miniature dragons attack Kirin and Ayato. They repel the attack and find that the dragons regenerate severed limbs. Fortunately, Kirin discovered that if they cut the dragons into small enough pieces, they can find the core, which, when destroyed, finally kills the beasts. The dragons regroup and counterattack. As he's dodging, Ayato feels the pavement cave in beneath him. Kirin manages to grab his wrist before he disappears, but the edge collapses, and they both plunge into darkness. Ayato and Kirin, having fallen into the storm sewer after the pavement collapsed, surface uninjured thanks to a bed of water. Suddenly, a bigger version of the dragon attacks. Ayato unchains himself to withstand the first attack. He's able to slash the monster in half and luckily destroys its core. Unfortunately, he has to pay the price for unchaining his power, and he passes out. When he comes to, they hang their clothes up to dry and spend some time back to back, bonding. She discloses to him that her father is in jail because he killed a man to protect her from assault when she was 8 years old. Since he was a Genestella, he was imprisoned. Kirin holds herself responsible and so is trying to gain influence at the school to get him released. She mentions that her uncle, despite the unfair treatments, is helping her to the fastest means possible to achieve this goal. Using his own experience, our protagonist helps her see that choosing her own way will be better for herself and her dad. Shortly thereafter, rescuers find them. Kirin confronts the woman beater and tells him she's going to choose her own way. The woman beater tells Kirin to stay away from Ayato. When Kirin refuses, the woman beater beats again. This time, however, Kirin only allows it once. She thanks him for his previous help and departs to start down her own path. As her first autonomous act, she decides to challenge Ayato in a duel. Ayato decides not to use Servaresta as it is too slow to Kirin's quick swordplay. She unleashes one of her most powerful techniques, and he switches weapons to a spear. She counters, and he switches weapons again. Kirin counters yet again, and he allows her to disarm him so he can use a grappling technique. That proved to be his winning move. Ayato is now the #1 ranked student in Seidoken. The next day, Kirin and Saya are seen practicing. They decide to team up for the festa. Individually, they're great. As a team, though, they literally stumble over each other. At lunch, they discuss their situation with Ayato and Julius. With Ayato's help, Saya and Kirin realize they need to focus on their teamwork, especially since the both of them had been strong solo players for so long. Saya decides she and Kirin will socialize tomorrow. After some scenes shopping and getting to know each other, Saya asks Kirin what she would like to do. Kirin randomly asks Saya to teach her to swim. Kirin confesses that she wants to learn how to swim to impress Ayato, as she is unsurprisingly falling in love with our MC. While practicing, Kirin bumps into another student with a big rack and an undersized bikini on. Kirin apologizes, but the other student refuses to accept the apology. Then she tries to backpedal until she finds out that Kirin can't swim, at which time the student taunts her. Saya reached the end of her patience and, from the edge of the pool, throws a flotation device at her. "Please stop mocking my partner," Saya says. The student finds out Saya is unranked, so after introducing herself as Violet Weinberg of Queenvale Girls Academy, she challenges Saya to a duel. Violet tries to make a showy start, but Saya just summons her weapon and fires. The duel is over about a second after it started. At the end of the day, as the sun sets, they sit by the pool and reflect on the day. Sada tells Kirin to stick up for herself more. The next day during practice, they are completely in sync. Julius and Ayato decide they might fall behind if they don't practice. Before the first rounds begin, Kirin is seen handing over a lunchbox to Ayato. She doesn't know how to cook, so she made him some rice balls. Ayato pets her on the head. To one-up Kirin, Saya makes Ayato bigger rice balls. When Julius asks her why the rice balls are so big, Saya says, "Bigger is better."
What do you mean by that?
Saya then asks Ayato to play fair as she also wants to be treated like a puppy. Ayato, of course, is a fair man. Julius is jealous as she wants in on the party, but she unfortunately didn't make any rice balls. Saya finishes her own lunchbox by herself and gets pregnant. Before the start of the festa, we get introduced to this badass-looking chick named Irene. Dirk Eberwein is the student council president of Lou Wolf Academy. He instructs Irene to take out Ayato in the Phoenix Festa. At the Coliseum, Mediev Mesa, chairman of the Phoenix Festa, begins the event with a speech. Ayato and Mediev make eye contact during the announcement. A hint was given earlier about Ayato and Mediev's relationship. The festa kicks off with none other than Julius and Ayato. They get a hyped introduction from the announcers as the number 1 and number 5 ranked at Seidoken. Not much to talk about in the first round. Ayato unchains himself and ends the fight in one stroke. The next day, Ayato and Julius are on a date when they come across Irene, who drew a crowd. She is seen clapping on some nobodies who want a cop of feel. She looks to the crowd and picks a fight with Ayato. Julius defends her man, asking what her problem is. Irene tells Julius to step aside as she has no business with a clingy girlfriend. Things are heating up. Irene pulls out her ogre Lux called the Gravi Sheath. But another girl appears and shouts out to stop the nonsense. Her name is Priscilla, Irene's younger sister. She tells Irene to apologize, and Irene reluctantly obeys. Next, Kirin and Saya take the stage. The announcers make a mistake, thinking that Kirin is older between the two. They note the difference in character development as Kirin has grown bigger in more ways than one. When the battle begins, Kirin easily defeats her opponent in one stroke, while Saya puts on a small show. After, the two take a shower. Sada compliments Kirin for her character development, and is sad that her own character development isn't developed. Saya then insists on giving Kirin a massage on her swollen parts from the fight. When Kirin says she's all good, Saya warms up her fingers and says she needs her partner in the best shape possible. She goes on the offensive, but Kirin's quick swordplay is unmatched. Saya knows she can't beat Kirin in a sword fight, so she gives up. Ayato and Julius get back from their date just in time to catch the show. Round 2 begins. Since Ayato had all the fun in the first round, Julius decides to take this one herself.
Flame of the Tarokia! Get her, Primrose! Now release! Semi-Serena!
After, Julius learns from her mistakes and makes Ayato lunch. She's also a terrible cook, but she wants to one-up Saya and Kirin, so she makes Ayato sandwiches instead of rice balls. After Ayato says he likes it, Julius shares her frustration, scolding Ayato for not petting her like he does for the others. Not sure if that's the type of affection she would want from Ayato, but sure, we'll go with that. Ayato awkwardly pets her, and Julius is turned on. Later, Ayato visits Claudia. He hasn't been a great harem king since he spends most of his time with Julius. Claudia is also everyone's favorite harem girl, so the writers gave her some screen time. She always makes sure to use her best assets to make sure Ayato keeps coming back. But the conversation is cut short when Kirin pings Ayato saying she lost Saya. Agreeing to help find Saya, Ayato says he has to go. But Ayato can't get his mind off Claudia. After finding Saya and spending the rest of the day with Julius, Ayato visits Claudia at her dorm. He wants to continue the character development from before, but Claudia is asleep. He thinks she is so cute, and thinks she won't mind if he wakes her up, so he goes for it. But uncharacteristically, she begins to attack Ayato. Pinned down, Ayato reaches out and calls her name. Finally, Claudia comes to her senses. Before she explains what just happened, Claudia asks Ayato to participate in the Grips Festa, another festa held next year. He agrees with the condition that Julius can join as well, and Claudia acts like she's jealous. But she's just kidding as she says that she was going to ask Julius anyways. Since they are now teammates, Claudia explains the secret of her ogre Lux, the Pandora, which requires the wielder to experience their own death every night in their dreams. She adds that most ogre Luxes have bad personalities, but that Ayato is lucky to have the Ser Veresta, which is on the good side of the spectrum. She also notes that the Gravi sheath is probably on the bad end since it's been causing Irene to be more violent these days. After, Claudia tells him to sleep over again for more character development, but Ayato says it's too late now since his match is tomorrow. Before the match begins, Irene is seen sucking on Priscilla's blood. We find out that Priscilla is a regenerative that can heal the wounds of the recipient. The Gravi sheath also gets a power-up. When the battle begins, Ayato immediately unchains himself.
Go! That's pretty crafty!
The pair are trying to finish it before Ayato's 5-minute limit, but Irene puts up a good fight. Things look worse when Irene goes to Priscilla for another power-up.
Now get out of my sight!
But our MC is overpowered, so he slices up all the balls and creates an opening for Julius.
Gotta be kidding. Damn.
Although they land a hit, Irene emerges unharmed thanks to the Gravi sheath. But it also seems to have taken control of Irene's body as it sucks profusely on Priscilla's blood. Ayato is about to run out of time, but suddenly, the Ser Veresta calls out. As it senses the hostility from the Gravi sheath, Ser Veresta wants to lend Ayato more of its power.
Reverse gouging shell!
Our harem girls are turned on. Claudia blushes as she thinks about all the nasty things she'll do to Ayato back at her dorm tonight. Ayato faints from exhaustion, and he also reveals to the world his limitations using his overpowered ability as the chains lock him up again. Guys like Dirk begin to think that he's not all that and a bag of potato chips with the limitation, but the girls find him even more attractive, for whatever reason. Must be nice being the main character. In the locker room, the two chat about how they need to adjust their strategy now that everyone knows about his time limit. Ayato confirms to Julius that instead of avoiding, he will tackle the problem head-on. He then reconfirms his promise to her that he will always protect her.
I need to tackle my seal head-on.
Don't try to fight this alone, okay? You and I are partners. Since you're so hell-bent on having my back, I'll have yours as well. Ayato!
The girls are worried about Ayato, so they offer their support. Claudia is about to give him her gentle plot as she always does, but is beaten to it by Saya, who offers him a firmer plot. Thinking Ayato is probably uncomfortable, Karen offers her more tender plot instead. Claudia is unmatched, however, as her plot is the most comfortable in all of Asterisk.
You're a lucky man.
Ayato and Julius are upset since their weakness has spread like wildfire ever since it was exposed. Julius is worried about him, since he's still hurt from the previous fight, but he says he'll manage to release his ultimate move at least one more time. She tells him it would have been hard for them to defeat their next opponents even at his full strength, so it seems impossible now. The last match of the round 5 of the Phoenix Festig begins and everyone is anticipating the match, hoping to see Ayato in action once more. Their opponents, Song and Luo, enter the arena and the battle starts. Song and Luo confirm the rumors that Ayato cannot fight at his full strength by charging at him simultaneously. Julius tries her best to protect him and creates a wall of flames, dividing the arena in two to make it a more fair one-on-one, so they'd at least have a chance. The fight continues, but Ayato and Julius strategically time their moves, removing the firewall at the last second so Song and Luo's attacks are aimed at each other. Thus, they were able to win by catching them off guard. Afterward, Song and Luo surprisingly congratulate them on their victory and remarkable plan, as they warn them of their next rivals, Shunyun and Shinhuali. They basically call them deceptive and treacherous. And speak of the devil, the twins arrive, giving further proof of what Song and Luo said about them was true. Later, Kirin, Saya, and Flora visit Ayato and Julius to celebrate their win. Flora Clem is from Lysultania, and Julius is quite surprised to see her since she's supposed to be training to become a maid. Julius used to visit the orphanage that Flora is from, and thus, she looks up to the princess and hopes to study at the same school one day. Julius promises to fulfill all her dreams, as that's what she's going to ask for if she wins the festa. The next morning, Yubuki arrives home and warns Ayato about the twins, who are highly skilled in using the star senjutsu technique. Ayato, Julius, and Flora meet up at a restaurant later because Flora claims to have important business to discuss with Ayato. Apparently, Julius's brother wants Flora to interrogate his possible future brother-in-law, as she asks Ayato all sorts of personal questions about his relationship with her. Julius is triggered as she confiscates the notebook with the questions. Just then, the student council secretary at Luolf, Corona Kashimaru, approaches them because her master wants to meet them. Julius and Ayato go meet Dirk in his limousine. Julius is furious because he's the one who ordered Irene to destroy Ayato, but he gets to the point and asks about Haruka. Dirk met her only once years ago at the Eclipse Festa, an illegal and violent event where killing is allowed, created by scums dissatisfied with the original festas. The festa, however, has been disbanded ever since and no longer exists. Haruka participated and got badly injured as she lost the fight, and no one knows what happened to her after it as she disappeared. Dirk asks him about his connection to Maydf Mesa, the chairman of the Festa steering committee, and since Ayato seemed like he didn't know the name, Dirk tells them to leave, having nothing else to discuss. Later, Ayato and Julius strategize and study how their next opponents create a situation where they have an insurmountable advantage over their enemies. On the day of their battle, the fight begins with the twins taunting Ayato for knowing his weakness of his sealed powers. Shinhua makes clones of herself that attack Ayato at the same time while Shinyun attacks Julius. Ayato and Julius struggle to fight back. Julius is badly injured and victory seems impossible for them when Ayato reaches his 5-minute limit. Surprisingly, at the very last moment, Ayato pretends to be knocked down as he breaks Shinyun's badge. Admittedly quite a clever tactic. However, his opponents are more treacherous as he realizes he only just defeated a clone. Shinyun traps him in a dome of explosives, but Julius rescues him and they stand to fight again. Ayato claims something has awoken in him and asks Julius to buy him some time. She destroys the invisible talismans they had laid out and takes them on both at once. However, despite her best efforts, Shinyun is able to detain and constantly attack her with more explosive talismans. Now would be a good moment for Ayato to step in, but he's still in his corner while his partner suffers. Finally, he arrives, blocking a fatal blow aimed at Julius, as he has just managed to break his seal one more level and can now last an hour. His new upgrade helps him see Shinyun's invisible talismans and Shinoa's evil clones as he destroys her badge. Shinyun is losing it and creates a giant woven sphere from all of her talismans combined and multiplies them to create an illusion. Ayato runs to cover Julius as he decides there's no need to dodge and slices through all the flaming spheres in one strike. Shinyun stands dumbfounded as Ayato punches her and she passes out. Flora is really happy for them as she congratulates their victory, and Claudia invites Ayato to her room again, eager to restore his vitality. Julius claims she needs him for a strategy meeting as the two girls fight over him. Kirin and Saya face ARD and RMC in the semi-final as ARD comes under attack for the first time ever in the tournament. Sai hits RMC, but she uses her Lux as a shield to block it and they both use their OP equipment to fire shots at each other. Meanwhile, Kirin uses her sword skills to continuously strike at ARD as she tries to break the robot's strong armor. Saya is determined to prove that the guns her father has built for her are in no way inferior to Camilla's RMC. RMC maximizes her weapon upgrade and aims towards Saya, who is also ready to fire. Their light beams collide, but Saya's is stronger as it manages to push back on RMC, who takes quite a powerful hit. However, in true Power Ranger fashion, the two robots combine to form a giant, more equipped robot. Kirin is already quite beat up, so Saya covers for her and withstands the powerful attack, since it includes both the robot's powers. Saya and Kirin give it their best shot, but the Power Rangers are too powerful for them as they lose the match. Later, Ayato and the others find out that Flora has been kidnapped, and the kidnappers demand an immediate freeze of the Ser Veresta. The freeze would render him unable to use his weapon permanently. Saya and Kirin go to find and rescue Flora. Julius wants him to sacrifice his sword, and Ayato, being a chat protagonist, says he'll do whatever it takes to rescue a girl in need. Claudia says she'll use her connections to delay the actual freezing process to buy them some time. Moreover, she advises him to use a different Lux in the tournament until they find Flora. Ayato and Julius face the young prodigy Elliot Forster and Doroteo Lemus in their next battle, while Saya and Kirin look for Flora. The fight begins and armor appears on Lemus, protecting him from Julius's attack. He also summons a steed and a lance as he and Julius continue to fight. Ayato is up against Elliot and they engage in a sword fight. However, Elliot is not able to last as long as he'd hoped, as Ayato has far superior strength and speed. Julius struggles for a bit with Lemus's lance, but his armor cannot protect him from her firewall, and she breaks his badge. They tell Ibuki about their latest predicament. He tells them not to rely on him too much. Ayato meets up with Irene in secret to ask her if she knows anything about Flora, but unfortunately, she doesn't have any information. Ayato ends up being chased in the streets where he meets a girl who offers to help him. Ayato thinks the girl is Astriga as she takes his hand and leads him out of the alleys and into a safe area away from his pursuers. Ayato is shocked when she knows his name, but she claims it's just because he's famous as the finalist of the festa. Suddenly, a man finds them and wants both of them to come with him. He attacks her and Ayato defends her, but she really doesn't need any help as she knocks out the man with a single kick. She offers him her help to look for Flora, and he provides the necessary details. The girl asks him to keep what she's about to do next a secret. As she transforms her appearance and reveals she is Sylvia Lionheim. Ayato is shocked as Sylvia starts to sing and spreads her magic across the city and is able to pinpoint a location on the map he's provided. Like a Chad, he immediately asks for her number, which turns Sylvia on since he's so straightforward. He tells her he wants to thank her properly next time. Saya and Kirin decide that Ayato and Julius should rest since their final is at noon, while they look for Flora at the location he's provided. They head inside the building where Flora is being held with Ibuki and are attacked by an army of mana monsters. Saya eliminates them with her gun, and suddenly Lester McPhail arrives, since Ibuki had asked for his help. He fights the mana monsters while the other three go search for Flora. Julius is grateful she has friends like Kirin and Saya that she can rely on, as she and Ayato step into the arena for their final battle against RMC and ARD. As the final of the Phoenix Festa begins, everyone anticipates who the winner is going to be. Julius and Ayato are happy with their opponents in the final, so they know they can go all out in defeating them. The fight begins and Ayato skillfully manages to trace Julius's movements and predict RMC attacks at the same time. Ayato and Julius collaborate to devise a plan aimed at coercing ARD and RMC to merge at the earliest opportunity and then defeating them during the merging process. Their plan is successful as the two robots decide to merge, and they immediately set their plan in action. During the process, Ayato risks it all and charges, managing to vanquish RMC and breaking Camila's badge. However, he falls short in his attempt to overpower ARD, whose transformed state grants him greater power. In the meantime, Saya and Kirin successfully locate Flora and engage in a challenging battle with the Shadow Master Werner. But they eventually win, enabling them to rescue her. Once Flora is rescued, Claudia broadcasts the news of her safety over the microphone. She actually interrupted the match commentary to announce this. Ayato sees this as the green light to cancel the freeze on his weapon and activates the Ser Veresta. Julius and Ayato dive headfirst into the fight, deploying one attack after another. However, Ernesta has a firm belief in ARD, who now seems to realize its true potential. It attacks and Julius tries to counter but fails, followed by an explosion that destroys the entire arena. Julius and Ayato are almost beaten, but she uses the last of her strength to help Ayato transform Cerberesta into the most ideal weapon for him. He and the combined robots approach each other slowly for the extra dramatic effect. In just a few strikes and jumps on flying platforms, Ayato breaks his opponent's badge. Finally, the 2-week-long Phoenix Festa is over, and Ayato and Julius are the winners. Madieth congratulates them on their victory and hands over the trophy as the entire arena cheers for them. All their friends congratulate them, but Yabuki is nowhere to be seen. He apprehends Flora's masked perpetrator in an underground tunnel as everyone wonders where he is. He's busy being the most useful character. Ernesta refuses to join forces with Dirk, but her resolve falters when he offers her valuable resources for her next project. Flora feels guilty for causing trouble for everybody, but Julius assures her not to worry. Everyone goes out for a celebratory lunch, and Julius asks them about their plans for the winter vacations. Saya is about to ask Ayato to spend New Year's with her, but Julius interrupts and takes them all on a vacation to Lysultania. The group receive a very warm welcome from the entire country. They go to Julius's home to visit her brother, Jalbert, the king of the country, and sister-in-law, Maria. It's almost dinner time and Saya is nowhere to be found. Ayato finds her on the roof where she's really sad and apologizes to him for not staying in touch. She feels even though she might not have been able to help him find Haruka, she'd at least help him feel better. Claudia consults them all about next year's Grips Festa and says she'd like them to participate as her teammates, and they all agree. Ayato dresses up for the banquet and compliments all the stunning girls. Ayato escorts Julius to the party, and she tells him her brother is like a puppet and has no enthusiasm for his job. Kirin says she wants to link arms with Ayato too, and he agrees as Saya joins in on the other side. Just then, an old man approaches him, saying it's his job to make sure he doesn't join Claudia's team for the next festa. Ayato refuses, and he summons a giant lion-like beast with dragon wings and a serpent tail. The entire gang teams up and defeats the monster, and the old man is surprised they were able to do all that without a weapon. Jalbert says the old man was Gustav Marlowe, an internationally wanted criminal. He's a member of the group behind Jade Dusk, which he joined for monetary reasons. However, there seems to be nothing political about his motives, and he was just carrying out someone's request. Jalbert then sends all the others away and asks Ayato to marry Julius. Julius practically explodes as Jalbert continues saying it's okay if they start by being engaged. Jalbert has decided this for her sake because he doesn't want her to end up like him, married to someone that's convenient for the Integrated Enterprise Foundation. Ayato says he doesn't want to bind Julius in any kind of shackles. Next, Jalbert asks Julius not to participate in the Grips Festa. He's afraid she will become so popular she'd become more important than him as king. Julius storms off angrily and Ayato finds her at the orphanage by the lake. He meets Therese, who is in charge of the orphanage and the church. The nuns at the church think Ayato is quite attractive as they shy away from him. Julius sees the greenhouse and is reminded of one of her friends who used to live there. However, it's too much for her and she leaves. Ayato follows and they walk through the city. Even though she won the festa and achieved her goal of saving the orphanage, she's still worried about the rest of her country. Suddenly, a car passes by and Julius sees someone she recognizes as she follows. She encounters Ophelia and the two get into a fight where Julius is determined to break her school badge. Julius attacks, but Ophelia is too powerful and she is soon knocked out. Ayato does his best to protect her, but Ophelia is about to end them when Gustav arrives, asking her to hand over her prey. She agrees, and leaves as Gustav summons two beasts, Orthrus and Cerberus, two giant three-headed dogs. With Julius in one arm and a sword in the other, Ayato struggles, but Claudia arrives just in time, beheading the creature. Ayato wakes up days after his fight with Ophelia with Saya and Kirin snuggled up next to him. Julius enters the room and thanks Ayato for saving her life. She explains more about her history with Ophelia, and learns they used to be best friends. He learns that there was nothing she loved more than plants, but the orphanage had sold her off to an Alican scientist, Hilda Jane Rowlands, when they were short on money. The scientist was crazily obsessed with manufacturing Genistella and used Ophelia as a test subject. The experiment makes her a Genistella that wilts any plants she approaches. Meanwhile, in the present, Gustav attacks the entire country with his monsters. Julius and Ayato go to confront him, and he summons a Hydra. They do their best to fight it as Ayato chops off its heads and Saya arrives as backup. Together, they behead all 9 of its heads, defeating the monster. Karen takes on Gustav and captures him. Claudia tells her father Gustav has been apprehended, and he begs her to withdraw from the festa, but she refuses. The next day Julius promises Julbert she's going to win the festa, and expands the king's powers to improve the conditions of her country. Julbert promises to stop being a good-for-nothing brother and help her. Ayato receives a call from Madiath, saying he's found his sister. He finally gets to see Haruka, but she's unfortunately in a coma. Later, while he's sitting alone, Hilda approaches him and offers to cure Haruka. Many questions are yet to be answered. Why is everyone against our group participating in the next festa? What the hell happened to Haruka, and how is Ayato finding out that she's in a freaking coma for the first time after 5 years? How will Julius influence the future of her country? Thanks for making it to the end. Like and subscribe for more content like this. Have a great day.